All right, speaking of Courage podcast, we are back in studio for episode...
I think it's number 6, but we're still missing an episode.
Yeah, that episode will be coming up.
Yeah.
I promise. I'm just getting all the pictures together and everything. But we got a new camera, so I was getting that thing together. I won't even go into it, but yeah, it was a big process. Had to get different apps to convert the video file to something else.
Final result looks good.
Yeah.
Look good, Donnie. I appreciate
Not
your
too
work.
bad, not too
Definitely
bad.
appreciate it.
So yeah, you were just telling me about a battle you're in on eBay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
As you can see, I like to buy and collect my stuff here. So
Yeah.
I bought several thousand things on eBay. This is kind of my first real bad experience
Yeah.
with it. But
Somebody tried to
all's
send
well
him
that
a
ends
funky
well.
Purple Heart, dude.
I got some money. I got my money back. So, yeah.
So where are we headed today?
Back to World War II, and we're sticking local again. So we've been talking about San Bernardino quite a bit.
Yeah.
We're sticking in San Bernardino, and one of the more iconic parts of San Bernardino is Norton Air Force Base. So, like we talked about before, a lot of times you see things and you go around the towns and you don't really know, or you don't ask questions, or you don't wonder why. Why was Norton Air Force Base named Norton Air Force Base? So today we're going to talk about Leland Francis Norton, who was born and raised, grew up, bred in San Bernardino, and he's the one that the base was ended up being named after.
Yeah, in Southern California here, we're in San Bernardino County, and if you grew up here, Norton Air Force Base was just always there. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows somebody that was in the military, or was this an Air Force? It was an Air Force.
And a lot of San Bernardino's prosperity was built up around Norton Air Force Base, unfortunately. So when they started closing a lot of the bases, and it was one of them that brought a lot of negativity to the city. A lot of people lost jobs. A lot of people moved out.
That's
a lot
when
of the barracks stood. Yeah, that's part of the reason that's some of the reasons things went sideways.
Took a big part of the economy away.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
Okay, so we're in World War II.
Yep.
Where are we at?
So we're doing Air Corps this time. So I'll readily admit I don't know as much about the equipment, machines. You know, I can change my tire, but I can't change my oil.
Yeah.
So dealing with a lot of the aircraft and stuff is not kind of my forte. So we're talking about the Air Corps, which was prior to, I believe, 1947, the Air Force was part of the Army. It was the Army Air Corps.
So before it was the Air Force, it was called the Air Corps?
Army Air Corps.
Okay, Army
and then
Air
it changed to the U.S. Army Air Forces, and then eventually it became the U.S. Air Force and became its own branch.
Okay, what's the big difference there?
In between the Army Air Corps?
Yeah, well, I'm just saying,
autonomy.
like, you have Navy, you have Army, and then you have Air Force. Like, if you were to go enlist with Air Force...
Well, it depends on your job. Essentially, the Army is the largest ground-based force. That's the bulk of our military, whether the Marines like to admit it or not. That's the workhorse. You have your infantry, which are the combat guys. You have your truck drivers. You have your mechanics. You have your maintenance. You have your supply lines. You have everything. The Navy is control of the seas, right? Navy it controls the waterways. It gets you to where and from. The Air Force is the air power that controls the sky. And then the Marines are a branch of the Navy, but they're a department of the Navy. They're meant to augment the Navy. Traditionally, they used to be the protection on board ships, and they were expeditionary forces. During World War II and after, actually starting World War I, they kind of grew into their own mini army. They won't like that term, but where they have the infantry, the truck drivers, the supply, the tankers, and everything like that. But they're for amphibious landings. And in World War II, it was like the Navy and the Marine Corps were together under Nimitz, and then the Army and the Air Force were together over, under MacArthur and everything like. So there was rivalry and things like that.
So when soldiers are getting flown to Afghanistan or Iraq, is that the Air Force that handles all flights and everything?
Yeah, the big C-47s, C-130s, and all that kind of stuff.
And you flew on those?
When I went to Iraq, when I went over there initially, we flew on a civilian airline. There were stewardesses and stuff. Oh, really? Yeah, we got to walk on with our rifles, but they had to have a plastic little bolt catch so the bolt couldn't go forward.
Oh, that was crazy.
I shoved my machine gun under the seat, and
You actually had it on your person?
Yeah, everybody else had their little rifles. I had my 240 Bravo, which I didn't have a lot of leg room for my long-ass flight over there.
And it was a civilian...
It's a civilian flight, so it was just military on there, but the stewardesses, like, they were flying to Paris, and then they'd fly here, and then they'd pick up soldiers.
Did they, serve you and stuff?
Yeah, and they were very rude. They were, I remember the one lady, she was American, but she's like, I hate America, I'll never go back. And we're like, well, nice to meet you too, thanks, But we were all in our desert uniforms and stuff. But then I went home on leave, and when I went back, it was a C-130 transport.
Is that a loud, scary plane?
It's scary, but it's monotonous at some point. It's just that loud drum.
Yeah.
When I was in Kuwait, because you land in Kuwait, everybody lands in Kuwait, and then you go where you're going. And we went to Iraq. We convoyed up. We drove up. But some of the other guys, they flew in, and they did what was called a combat landing. So instead of landing like
heard.
normal, they go almost like straight down to avoid incoming fire. And
Same with takeoff, right?
Yeah, I've heard that was terrifying, and,
Yeah.
and thank God I wasn't any part of that.
Is that so they don't get shot down?
Yeah, so there's less time of them being within range of surface-to-air missiles, rockets, RPGs, things like that.
Oh my God, that scares me just thinking about it.
My buddy Davis, Luke, he was telling, like, you're like grabbing onto the harness, just going fuck, 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 you know, as you go. And I would have freaked out because I hate.
Me too, man. I'm terrified of it.
Yeah.
So okay, we're with the Air Corps now. World War II. What part?
Yeah, so World War II, to go back a little bit on the Air Corps, in World War I was kind of the dawn of aviation in the military, right?
Yeah.
World War I, you have like biplanes, the Red Baron, Snoopy, things like that. You know,
Yeah.
the airplanes were like a new novel concept. There was controversy on how successful they were and how useful they were going to be. So we used them to fly over the trenches. I mean, they would physically drop bombs out of the side of the plane, but they weren't that devastating.
With their hand?
Yeah, with their hand.
No
And then they
way.
had the chattering machine guns and the dogfights and this gentlemanly affair, you know. But a lot of people after the war were like, you know, yeah, it's great for scouting and reconnaissance, but it's not a major player. World War II, air power was essential, right? Think about Saving Private Ryan when all those troops were landing on the beach. Now imagine if there were Germans up strafing them as they were coming down, right?
Right.
Imagine all the hell we've talked about in all these battles and things like that. Imagine if the enemy controlled the skies and they were shooting you and bombing you. Imagine Vietnam when you're stuck in that trench and you call for fire and the planes come and save you out. Imagine if it was on the other side.
Yeah.
So the reason we were able to land on D-Day and survive was because our Army Air Corps guys had been successful, along with the British and our other allies, in stopping the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, which was the greatest air force in the world prior to that. Otherwise, that never would have happened.
Really? So they're coming up from behind and just infiltrating behind the lines as they're coming on the beach?
So this didn't happen. We had destroyed the Luftwaffe by then.
So they didn't
the German Air Force, we controlled the air, which is why it was successful. Had we not been able to control the air, there's no chance that many of these operations would have been successful.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and to go back on that, the Air Force, I'm going to interchangeably call it Air Force, Air Corps, Army Air Corps, all those things. The Air Corps at the time, after Pearl Harbor, the 8th Air Force, which was kind of the glory unit of the Air Force, it fought in Europe. It was our major player. They had 7 planes in the months after Pearl Harbor. By the end of the war, they were the largest Air Force in the world. They ended up losing. Just the 8th Air Force, this is like the equivalent to an Army division, lost 26,000 men in the campaign over Europe. So Marines, you think of Marines, as a hard-fought The 8th Air Force, just one unit of the Air Force, there's a 1st Air Force, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, all the way up to, I think, 12th, and then there's like a 20th. The 8th Air Force alone lost more airmen in combat than the whole Marine Corps did in the whole of World War II. So all of the Marine Corps' combined units, all of their combat losses, Iwo Jima, Peleliu, Guadalcanal, all those things, lost less than these guys did flying over the skies of Europe.
Why?
It was just, we'll get into that a little bit, but there's a lot to it. So if you don't know anything about the way they fought, you have your bomber planes, you have your fighter planes, you have all these things. So the bombers are these big, heavy, slow, lumbering beasts. They made the flying fortresses. You have your machine gunner. Have you ever seen any of the old movies or anything like that? You'll have the pilot and the bombardier, and then you have the machine gunners on the side. They're flying around like trucks on the freeway.
Yeah.
And then the German fighter jets that are coming up at them are like those little Porsches that zoom by you, zoom, zoom, zoom.
Yeah.
So you can't even hit them. So they're coming up and hit them. So if you imagine the bomber plane, they're flying over occupied country. So you're leaving your bases in England. You're crossing the English Channel, and then once you get to Europe, it's all enemy. So the Germans have these fixed fortifications. They have these big anti-aircraft guns. They've been doing this for a long time. They know what they're doing. So as you're going in, and they know your path because you're going the same way every time, the skies open up. Yeah, I showed you a picture one time, and you asked me what those puffs were.
Yeah.
The Air Corps used to call them little black flowers that grow in the sky. They're just little black puffs.
Yeah.
That's basically these bombs that go up and explode, and they send shrapnel, and they send shockwaves, and they rock the planes, and they shoot the planes, right?
Yeah.
Once you make it through that minefield, and a literal minefield in the air, and you try to drop your bombs, that's when the fighter planes come up after you, right? So your plane might already be crippled. You might already be having engine damage. You've already been flying all this way on these tubs that are, being maintained mission after mission after mission after mission after mission, and then the fighters come after you, and they are looking to kill you because you're killing their country on the ground. You're destroying their war effort, so they're just coming at you. And our fighter planes would support the Air Corps, or the bombers, right? But they don't have as much fuel because they're a lot smaller plane and they burn it faster. So they'll escort them to away, and then they have to fly away. So for the hardest part of the journey, those bombers are going over enemy territory alone. The only defense they have is their 1 or 2 machine gunners or whatever they have. Or in certain cases, if they have guns on the front of the plane or things like that. So they're just getting freaking
What a terrifying job.
Terrifying job.
Is it a plane that you can, escape out of?
Yeah.
Like
so
an
you
ejection?
can air. They had parachutes on board, and a lot of guys were successful in getting out. Sometimes you were, sometimes you weren't. I'll show you some videos of. You'll see some of the types of tailspins they get in, or
there's no getting out.
Yeah, if you get hit and your engines fail, you can make that decision to bail out, and you might be successful. And then where are you going to land though? You're in enemy territory. It's not like if I make it back,
shooting up at you too, right?
Sometimes they were, yeah. But it's not like I just need to get back to the whole continent of Europe is occupied at this time. Where are you going to go, right?
Yeah.
Other times, though, they'll get hit and the plane can fold. There's a certain video I'm thinking of that I'm going to show you later where it's just a fireball. You can't get out of that thing. Or like I said, they go into a dive. You can't just jump out.
Centrifugal force
Yeah,
just pinning you.
it's exactly.
Yeah.
And you're just plummeting to your death, right? There's so many stories of the Air Corps of guys stuck in the ball turrets. Have you ever seen what a ball turret is?
Yeah.
On the bottom of the plane, those little bellies. There's a great account from, now I'm drawing a blank on his name, one of the famous World War II reporters of the planes coming in, and they're radioing in, our landing gear's stuck, which means they're going to have to belly crash and try to get in, but our ball turret gunner's stuck. He can't pivot to climb up into the hatch, so they know he's going to die. There's nothing you can do there, right?
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
So he's stuck in that little ball.
Waiting to die, yeah, basically.
And he knows it, too.
And he knows it, and there's nothing they can do. So, you can't just fly forever. Eventually, he's going to go.
Dang, that's a bummer, man.
Yes, it's.
So it took balls to be in.
It took balls, and it's such a different type of courage.
Yes.
I've always been attracted to the infantry. You know, I have a rifle, you have a rifle, let's fight. You know, I'm pinned down, but if I use a little bit of my skill, if I have luck, skill, and courage on my side, we can get through. With the Air Corps, it's a lot of luck.
Yeah.
It's a lot of.
No matter how good you are.
No matter how good you are, when all those planes take off, there's a good chance you're not coming home. At one point in the war, it was pretty much 50-50 odds whether or not your plane was going to return.
Wow.
Every time you took off.
And they still had guys coming.
Yeah, they had guys coming. These are huge armadas of ships flying over, crossing the English Channel and going. And my wife and I watched a documentary, I think it was called Into the Blue, where they were talking about how many accidents they would have just going up. So the planes would be linking up, and if one of them was flying low or high, they'd hit and they'd crash, and you're dead at that point. You know,
there's no coming back.
There's thousands of bombers going up, and there's thousands of these ships in these marshalling zones. I haven't always been, but I'm scared to fly.
Yeah.
Every time we're flying anywhere, if you ask my wife, I look out the window and I'm already scared because you're feeling the ground going to you, and there's nowhere to brace, and there's nothing you can do, and it's just this mechanical beast.
Flying.
Now imagine if you look out the window and the enemy's coming at you,
God.
and there's a hotshot pilot that's already killed God knows how many. Because the Luftwaffe were aces galore.
Yeah.
An ace is someone that's killed over 5 planes.
Oh,
they
damn.
had thousands of aces because they just flew till they died. Basically. So they're coming up at you, they're watching their country getting bombed and burned.
And that's where they live, right?
And that's where they live.
So it's different.
Especially when we were getting to Germany, they're fighting with everything they have.
Yeah.
So they're coming up at you, and they're out for blood at that point, know. And then
and you're just sitting
you have
there.
to get there. Yeah.
Oh, and then how many times were they just like machine gunned, and you're in the belly of the plane and you're just seeing it.
Well, you'll see a lot of. If you look at the Air Corps as a whole, there's most, just like in the infantry, there's all the guys supporting. The Air Corps is the same way. Back in England, they would have, you had a ton of guys that were armament. You had a ton of guys that were mechanics, engineers, this and that. They were doing all that. But the guys that were up in the air, those guys were getting wounded. Those guys were getting hit. The enemy flies by and fires machine gun at you. You're catching pieces of that. You have a 4-man crew or however many people on your crew. One guy goes down. Now what are you going to do? You have a 6-man crew. There's a great movie called The Memphis Belle, which is based on the true story. So initially in the war in Europe, if you completed 25 missions, you got to go home. Nobody was making it to 25 missions. So the Memphis Belle was actually, I think it was the second, but at the time
it's actually a true bill?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So the Memphis Belle was one of the first to complete its 25 missions and go home. But there's some great scenes in that one. One of the airmen gets wounded, and they're like, we can't help him up here, and we're so far from home and stuff. And they're like, well, let's just strap the parachute onto him and throw him out. The Germans can take better care of him than we can, like stuff like that.
Holy crap! And that's true.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff's true. Yeah.
So they're throwing him out of a plane with a parachute, knowing that he'll be better as
hoping that either he'll be captured and treated well, or maybe some partisans will find him, hoping, but you don't know.
And they could, they have a better chance though.
Possibly, yeah. You don't know. It's just chaos, man. And this is what these guys are dealing with.
When it comes to that kind of stuff, when the odds are 50-50, like where does the courage come from?
Yeah,
man?
and it's so like I said, it's almost easy. Not easy. I definitely don't want to say that. But if you're getting shot at and you're pinned down, and you can think, the only way I'm going to survive this is to go through that enemy.
It plays to our narcissism a little bit when you're on the ground.
But the Air Corps, it's like I always thought of it like if there's a door and it's closed, and it was like, hey, you got to open that door and step in there. Okay, what are the odds? There's a 50% chance you're going to live, and there's a 50% chance you're going to die or get captured. Go ahead, get your ass in there.
Ugh.
Yeah, so that's some of what.
Yeah, it's out of your control because I think if you're infantry on the ground, you have this thing in the back of your head where you're like, well, I'm not going to die. It's kind of like, if you're driving
no
a
one
car.
thinks they're going to die.
Right,
it seems like,
But
you're driving a car. Think of all the accidents there actually are, but nobody thinks, they're still on their phone and not paying
attention. In an airplane, there's a lot of room for error.
But think how shotty your nerves get after, because these missions are hours and hours and hours and hours and hours long, flying over the channel. Your plane's already rickety because it's been used 100 times and has all these holes in it.
They're just
and these,
it
keep
together.
in mind, the high-level bombers, this is 25,000 feet in the air.
Damn.
Thin oxygen, right? So you got to think of the uncomfortable factor, too. Like we talked about in Vietnam, it's not just like, I'm going to go. The oxygen's so thin, you have to wear an oxygen mask. The air is so cold, it can be 50 degrees below zero. Your skin will freeze. So they're wearing wool and alpaca-lined big jackets, and they're wearing big gloves. And if you get shot and you strip your clothes, you're freezing, and you're
Holy crap!
25,000 feet. Yeah, you'll pass out if you're too long without your mask and things like that. And then these guys are flying, and these guys that are pilots that are in charge of all this. And not to mention what you're doing. You're dropping bombs on cities. You're killing people. They don't. That's one thing they have going for them is they're not seeing the whites of the eyes of the guys that are dead. So the psychological effects are a lot different. But stand back and think about that. What the consequences of your actions are, and it was necessary by all means, but it's still a heavy thing to bear on you, right?
Wow.
Think of all those things, and think after mission after mission after close call. There's you'll if you read some of the reports.
That's why these old pilots come back, man. Like whenever you get on a commercial jet and it's like some old gray-haired guys that flew in Vietnam or something, you're like, I'm good.
Yeah, most of those, a lot of the Vietnam pilots became commercial airline pilots. It's like this guy's got this. Yeah,
I just know he's gonna be fine.
But see, that's actually, like I said, I'm scared of flying. It terrifies me now. But that's one of the only ways I can comfort myself is like the pilot doesn't want to die either, and he's got some skill. But again, in this one, the pilot doesn't want to die, but he might not be able to help it because there's a lot of people that are very skilled that are trying to kill you. Yeah.
I wonder how they got the guys to stay motivated to get into those positions when the odds were so high of death.
Yeah, there's a lot of...
Do you know what I mean?
I mean, it goes back to esprit de corps, courage, pride, and wanting to end the war. These guys found that place for a reason. Right. Nobody was ever drafted and forced to be a pilot in the history of the world, or in the history of the United States, I should say. They're, these are hot shots. These are guys that want to be pilots. They want to fight. They want to go, and this is the way they choose to do it.
Right.
The fighter pilots had the glory, so these guys would want to be the fighter pilots or the bomber pilots, and then if they washed out, they might have to be the bombardier or the engineer or things like that and stuff, but they want to do this, and they know the odds. But it doesn't matter how brave you are. It doesn't matter how patriotic you are, how motivated you are. Like I said, 10 missions in, when you're on your third crew because your other guys have been killed and you had a close call and your engine went out and you guys had to land belly up and things like that. There's videos, you can watch them, of these guys coming in the English Channel. You'll see all the support personnel, they're waiting there with ambulances. There's just ambulances waiting for the runway. They don't even know what's coming back, but you're waiting to see the planes. How many are back? There's supposed to be 10. There's only 8. Shit, we lost 2, right? And then, okay, that one's got trouble, so they'll watch it, and they'll fire the flare up so they can see it, and then they'll start ready and go in, and then the plane will come down and try to skid, and it just bursts into a ball of flame, and then all these kids are dead,
Oh,
and again, kids, they're generally under 30. A lot of these...
Why, because the plane was jacked up or something?
Yeah, because they can't land. A lot of times the landing gear won't go down, or they got shot, or their engine was out, and they can't hit the skid right, or they can't land properly. There's
just ballsy bastards.
And landing on the grass. And I've been talking almost exclusively about Europe. Don't forget the Pacific, which is a whole different war over there. One thing that the Army Air Corps had going for it in Europe was when they're off, you get to live with English families and do these kinds of things. In the Pacific, when you're off, you're in a hut in the jungle, basically waiting around, and there's these scrounged parts, and they're patching these planes together and stuff like that. And they're
damn.
Yeah, so
I could only imagine those crusty pilots, man, just sitting up there like, oh, here we go,
Yeah.
hold on. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, you can almost picture it. You know what I mean?
It's just kind of a grit your teeth and get through it. I just imagine, like I said, when you picture the flak shaking the plane, even if it's not hitting you, and every time it's shaking in those rusty buckets, and when the bomb bay doors open, it's not. I mean, you could fall out.
Yeah.
Not where you're sitting, but physically you could. Like it's open. There's open air down there. You know? Can you imagine if you're flying to? Yeah, I don't know, Mexico or something on vacation, and then the bottom of the plane just opens up and you can see the ground.
Right there, I'm
freaking
done.
Terrifying. Yeah, it's just okay. I'm
and you
done.
got to get used to that.
Right, exactly. Depending on your position in the plane and things like that.
Man, okay, so where's our boy at?
So we're talking about Leland Norton. So Leland Norton was, again, some of the guys we've talked about have started here and then moved away. Leland Norton was born, bred, raised in true blue San Bernardino, right? So he comes from 21st Street in San Bernardino is the address as I found for him in my research here. He went to elementary school in San Bernardino. He went to high school. He's another one that went to San Bernardino Valley College. He worked at an ice cream shop on, I think it was called Haywood's Ice Cream on Highland Avenue. We all know where Highland Avenue is. We live over here. There's a great movie called The Best Years of Our Lives. It's one of the best movies ever made in World War II. And there's actually a character who was a soda jerk, meaning he made ice cream sodas and stuff like that. And then he became an officer in the Air Corps. It's the same thing as Leland Norton.
Yeah.
So literally, few years before the war, he's making malt ice cream shop, for the 1940s kids, and a few years later, he's piloting a plane over here, flying over Europe. He's the deputy commander of a squadron of bombers that are flying over Europe. So that's how quickly life changed for these guys, and how they were able to go from A to B, that childhood to adulthood. So we talked a little bit about the war in the past and World War II. So in Europe, September 1st, 1939, the Nazis invaded Poland, the Germans. Hitler invaded Poland, right?
Yeah.
Europe's starting to freak out. They ended up invading Austria. They ended up in Czechoslovakia, all these places, Poland. England and France declare war on Germany. Germany overruns France, which was a powerful nation. We have this negative connotation of France. But, in World War I, France fought very hard for 4 years. So they got steamrolled. So everybody's like, oh, my God, what's going on? England was the only country that was standing fast.
So
we
at
were
that
still
time,
neutral.
France was done.
France was done. There was Vichy France, and then there was the partisans on the other side. And
what does that look like?
Yeah,
so
that's
Germany takes over.
Yeah.
And then what does it look like?
Well, that's part of the reasons why there's the negative connotation of France. So a lot of people in France collaborated with the enemy and went over and, were living their peaceful lives. But there was a lot of the French resistance guys who were fighting it out, trying to do what they could, guerrilla campaigns fighting through France. But this is where France, Poland, Austria, all these occupied countries, this is where the Holocaust is, right? This is where people that are dissidents, these are the people that are political.
This is where it happened?
This is where it started. Poland was where all the concentration camps were. But if you were a Jew in France, you're not safe because you're an occupied country. If you're a Jew in Austria or if
you're in France, what does that look like?
So it looks like
German
when you look
soldiers
outside, there's German soldiers on the streets. There's Nazi banners flying everywhere.
They're in all of the political or all of the city.
Your town is at the will of the Germans. The local politicians.
Who's running it?
The local politicians have to give service to the Nazis, or they get taken over by the Nazis. Basically,
what a weird thing. Just
people are being hanged in the streets if they're not supporting this type of thing.
Because it's moving fast.
Oh, it's moving extremely fast.
So the organization can't quite be there. I know they were a very organized group, but. Imagine how much little stuff got lost.
But imagine, in the Netherlands, if you ever heard the Diary of Anne Frank, things like her account of a teenage girl when you're living your normal life, and then all of a sudden the Germans roll in, and then life just changes. That's how it is for all of Europe. And this is the fear of everybody else. And they were trying to do this to England, but England stood strong. That's where the Battle of Britain is. England refused to give in. So they were the only light of democracy and freedom that was standing up to the Germans at this time. All these other countries, they had their resistance and they're trying to fight, but England, God bless them, stood strong, and they had what was called the Battle of Britain, where the Germans decided they were going to soften these guys up. They were going to fly over and just bomb the shit out of England, and they did. It's called the Battle of Britain. 40,000 civilians were killed during the Battle of Britain. Damn. The Germans were dropping bombs. I think it was something like millions of people were made homeless. They're just flying their bombers over and attacking them, and the British... England is the United Kingdom is a small island.
Yeah.
Or chain, or if you count Ireland, it's two, It's not this huge place. It's about the size of California. They're the only ones that are putting up resistance against the Germans at this time. You have the Soviets that are getting, massacred on the Eastern Front at this time. They're fighting hard as well. But in Western Europe, the British are fighting hard. In the Battle of Britain, that's where the quote, never in the course of human history, I'm misquoting it now, has so much been owed to so few by so many. Because these British pilots were just flying up and sacrificing their lives to stop these Germans, to stop these planes, to stop. Every time you see a bomber, that's killing kids, basically, right?
Damn.
So they're flying up against all odds and trying to fight them, and they ended up winning. The British ended up winning the Battle of Britain, and it held off. A lot of Americans back home are watching this, and they're chomping at the bit. We need to go fight. We need to go help them. And a lot of our politicians are going, no, we need to stay out of the war. This is not our problem. This is Europe's problem. We did this last generation. Remember that, guys?
Yeah.
World War I was the war to end all war, and Europe needs to fix its own problems. So a lot of our guys are going, no, I'm going to do something. So Leland Norton's one of these guys. So he's in San Bernardino Valley College. He drops out of school and he joins the Canadian Air Force. He actually, say you think of Vietnam, guys running to Canada to get away, but he goes to Canada to fight. Canada's British, Britain's in the war.
Oh,
I want to fight.
That's how bad he wanted to fight?
That's how bad he wants to fight. So he joins the Royal Canadian Air Force to try to get.
That's awesome.
A lot of guys did. There was a good amount of people. They actually, I think it was called the Eagle Squadron of Americans that were fighting in England during the Battle of Britain and all that.
Wow.
So he's one of these guys. And he doesn't see combat as far as I can tell. I don't think he left Canada because I actually have his draft notice that I found online from 1940 when we started to realize, hey, the war's coming. They're sending out all these draft registrations, and his address is listed as Ontario, Canada, Royal Canadian Air Force, and it's his employer, British government. So it's kind of funny where these other guys, some of whom are just waking up to this, like what's going on in the world, he's already there trying to fight. So as the war progresses, they ended up letting all these guys basically transfer back into.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen Pearl Harbor?
Yeah.
Ben Affleck, remember when he's fighting it? That's the
Okay.
Eagle Squadron. So they were allowed back in. So he ends up being allowed back into the American Army Air Corps at the time. And initially, again, he didn't join to fly ferries, but they sent him to Maine, and then they sent him to Greenland for rescue work, basically like bombers that are going down in the channel or rescue type stuff, like almost like a Coast Guard type role.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to do that. He wants to fight. He joined for a reason, right? So he ended up volunteering for combat, and finally he was accepted into the 9th Air Force, which was getting ready to go overseas in Europe. And he went to England with the 9th Air Force, to where he was able to engage in combat with the Germans.
Man, what a motivated guy, huh?
Yeah,
To
and
get in the
again,
fight.
there's so many different types. But again, so you asked earlier, where do you find these guys, and where do you?
Yeah.
This guy
Maybe they find
went
you.
to a different country to try to get in the fight. Then, if that wasn't enough, they sent him to, I don't want to say a cush spot, but a non-combat spot. And he's like, no, I'm not having that. I want to go fight, right?
Yeah.
So he ends up in the 9th Air Force. The 8th Air Force was the one I was talking about, which is kind of the glory. But the 9th, they had fought in North Africa. They fought they ended up in England. They're flying these bombing raids over France initially, and then later into Germany. This is 1944. What they're doing, D-Day is June 6, 1944. D-Day is us breaching Europe and trying to close in the Reich, destroy the German Empire, so we can finally liberate Europe, as we call it, right? If we can't gain air superiority, we're done. We can't have it. They call it Fortress Europe, was what it was called, because it was like we are fighting the Germans in North Africa, the Russians are fighting them on the Eastern Front, this and that, but we can't get into that, because anywhere you land, it's going to be like Saving Private Ryan, right?
Yeah.
Fortress Europe, but Roosevelt said something to the effect of the Germans built a fortress, but they forgot to put a ceiling on it, meaning our bombers are going up there, right?
Yeah.
So again, like we talked about, they're just getting slaughtered, but it's almost a war of attrition at this point. The Germans are an amazing fighting unit. Their Air Force is amazing, but they only have X amount of people, right?
Yeah.
Eventually, theirs are going to die off. We have more people and we have more planes, so they can only make so many planes as long as we keep bombing their factories. Unfortunately, it became that. That's what's called a war of attrition.
Yeah.
So
Who can last longer?
Who can last longer? I have 100 guys. You have 40 guys. If every time we fight, I lose 15 and you lose 10, oh, well, I can lose more than you. We'll just keep grinding into each other, and eventually you're not going to have anyone left. So that's kind of, and that's way overgeneralizing, but that's kind of what it became. So they actually started using the bombers as bait for the Germans, because they realized the Germans will come up to get the bombers, and then our fighter pilots can cut them down. So a war of attrition is not one you want to find yourself in if you're the pawn.
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
these guys are the guys that are over there.
Damn, you imagine the bomber. They're like, yeah, we're going to use
Jesus.
you as bait, guys. Just go up there and hopefully we'll get them.
Hey, man, hope for the best. Yeah, and what that meant was, like, traditionally you want to fly over your target as quick as you can, bomb the target and get out. They were taking these long-ass routes on purpose so the Germans would have more time to come up and get them.
Make sure they see them.
Yeah, the more pilots we get of there, we can afford to lose more than they can. And we were being more successful.
That's such a shitty thing. Those are those things when the generals are sitting around the board game that you're like,
Those are those acceptable losses.
You don't want to hear that, though.
Yeah, if we lose 10% of our guys or 4% of our guys, that's acceptable loss. If I'm one of those guys, I'm not acceptable. I didn't agree to that, right?
Yeah.
So this is what Leland is at this point. I think his position was the deputy commander of the bombardment squadron, which is what that meant was the plane he was flying. They were called A-20 Havocs. They're a medium to low range bomber. So we talked about the 25,000 feet. These ones can go a lot lower than that. In the Pacific, they started using them with great success. They actually put machine guns on the front, and the pilots were able to almost use them like fighters, like strafe down and hit those ships and stuff like that. So it's a very pilot oriented. It's like driving a. I don't want to say driving a Porsche. I'm terrible with but it's something that you can control and you can manage.
Yeah.
These low range bombings. When they got to Europe, they realized they can't do that because the German flak is so much heavier than the Japanese. The Japanese are on these scatter. The Germans, this is their home country, and this is France. They've been there a long time, so they can't do that. So they're doing the medium and the high range bombing. But because of his position, though, he's the lead plane. So a lot of these planes have 3-man or 4-man. His plane has 4-man crew, including himself, because they have like a, not fiberglass, but like a glass bottom on the A-20 Havoc J or A-20J Havoc, so you can see down below. Because when they're flying in these big formations, when they have all these ships, all these planes in this armada, his plane's going to drop the bombs first. So when he drops, everyone else is going to drop. So what that means is think of all the pressure on you at this time. And if I didn't mention, he's 23 years old at this time.
Holy shit. Just hearing like your cousin that got a license at that age and driving around, you're like, huh?
I think my nephew's about 22, 23. 23 years old. And
imagine Shaddy flying a plane.
flying this plane, flying this bomber. And not only that, think of again, you're flying into this mission, you're flying for hours. When you drop, everyone else drops. If you drop your bombs too soon, you're not hitting a factory. You might be hitting women and children. They're the enemy, but they're still women and children.
And how do they dial that in?
Well, they had what's called a Norton bomb sight, which was very accurate. But it's still there's no way to not hit women and children. You're killing. We were killing civilians, and the British bombed Dresden intentionally, as payback for the battle. And a lot of civilians were slaughtered. But ultimately, we want to bomb the factories. We want to bomb the means of production. We want to stop them from building more planes. So when you're flying in, if you drop too early, not only are you potentially killing all these civilians, but you're not hitting your target. If you don't hit your target, you got to go back, or somebody else has to go back. So there's a shit ton of pressure on you, right? To have those nerves of steel, you're feeling that flak, you're feeling those shaking explosions, you're freaking out, your nerves are getting
what
shot.
happens how do you get it accurate? What's going on?
So there's the bombardier that's down below. They're looking through their Norton bomb sight.
One guy.
Yeah, the pilot's flying, the gunners are gunning, the bombardier's looking and mapping. There's the navigator.
So the pressure's on him for that.
The pressure's
drop.
on him because he's in charge. He's controlling this drop, right?
Yeah.
23 years old. Leland Norton from San Francisco.
Oh, he's the one doing the drop.
He's the one flying.
Okay.
The bombardier's dropping.
Yeah.
San Bernardino. I said San Francisco. Leland Norton from San Bernardino. He's in charge of this, right? He's on the radio. He's in command. Keep it steady, guys. Keep it together. If you start taking too much flak and you drop your bombs early, you might get out of there. But like I said, you got to go on another mission or somebody else does. Who's going to die in your place because you didn't complete that mission? There's times when guys would fly over and the cloud cover's too heavy, so you can't see anything. So they'd have to abort and keep going. And they'd just drop the bombs. Well, no, because we're not going to hit what we need to hit. We need to stop. We need to win this war. Essentially, in the bigger picture, in the smaller picture, I don't want to have to come back tomorrow and bomb this same site. So there's just an intense amount of pressure on that. 23 years old.
Man, you're just talking about a pilot. You don't even think there could be someone without gray hair. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But they were usually the good-looking guys with slick back and a leather jacket still.
Imagine a kid.
Yeah, this is a kid.
This is
23 years old, man.
Dude,
23 years old. And he's a captain.
He's the boss.
He's the boss. I mean, there's definitely higher ranking guys around him.
One of the great Medal of Honor guys that you've sent me, I love his little story. Not to go off on too much of a tangent, but he's like, we get over there. I think it was Vietnam, And he goes, this crusty old leader of ours, or whoever the guy was, he was grumpy, and man, I hated him. And, he's like the old veteran and old and gnarly, 24 years old.
that was Sammy Davis when he was talking about.
He tells great stories.
We called him they hated the old man, and he was just picking on us.
They called him the old man?
23 years old, yeah.
23, 24 years old. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's all good.
So pressure, steel nerves.
Yeah. So in March of 1944 is when the squadron deploys. By May 27th of 1944, Leland's on his 16th mission. So from March to May, 16 missions over occupied France. They're flying over France mostly. They're bombing factories. They're bombing railroads. They're bombing V-2 and V-1 rockets.
How are they getting the intel for that? Is that just
there's all
spies and
kinds of
stuff?
stuff. Yeah, well, you have other planes. You have your spotters. You have guys taking pictures. The planes are taking pictures. Some of these planes, they're going back and they're analyzing them. And
Wow.
there's 100 guys that are in behind the scenes to do any of these things, right? There's the partisans on the ground. There's parts that we know.
Isn't
There's
it
stuff
crazy
that we knew it was
when
already
you
there.
talk about the certain little items that we're talking, little missions, but you're just like, man, the whole big picture. Like somebody had to go find where that factory
Exactly.
was.
Mm-hmm.
How do they know that it was a factory that was producing this plane? You know,
Well, if you look at like the Cuban Missile Crisis and those pictures, have you ever seen those pictures?
Yeah.
Like to someone who doesn't know, it's just what the hell am I looking at? But somebody over there with their little scope was like, that's a rocket set, or they're setting up right there. It's that kind of stuff, and there's a lot more to it that I'm not knowledgeable enough to speak on. But they know where the railroad lines are. They know where the major cities are. They know where these things are. We have all these previous runs that have been bought and paid for. But I mentioned the V1 and the V2 rockets. Have you ever heard of those?
Yeah.
So those are literally, they launch them from France or from Germany, and they're just flying across the channel and killing civilians in England or killing civilians in France. So they're bombing these factories and these emplacements. So they're doing work that's saving lives, right? So again, May 27th, 1944, they're attacking a German marshalling yard where all this equipment in this factory is, and they ended up getting hit directly by flak. So like I said, flak can work where it's, you're hitting it by the shrapnel and shaking the plane and all these things. They got a direct hit on Norton's plane, right? So he's got a 4-man crew and his plane's hit. Both engines are shut off. He's in a position as the pilot to be able to bail out with the back guys, right? But 23-year-old Leland Norton decides that his buddies' lives are worth more than his.
So if he was to eject, his buddies can't?
They still can try, but the plane's going to go...
If he's out of there.
Right. So he decides he's got to keep this plane stable. So he gives everybody the order to evacuate. I'm going to try to stay with this thing that's literally falling apart beneath him. If he bails, though... Like I said, we talked about tailspins. It's out of control. These guys may or may not be able to get out. You have the guy below. You have the guy, guys in different parts of the plane. He's already wounded as well. I don't know the extent of his wounds, but by the documentation I found, he's already wounded. It said grievously wounded is what I read. So grievously wounded. I don't know the condition of the other guys in the plane, but this is that's a medium bomber that's been struck directly by flak. There's a good chance all these guys are wounded, right?
Yeah.
So rather than panicking, rather than freaking out, rather than trying to save himself, he gives them the command, get out of here. I'm going to hold this. I'm going to hold steady as long as I can. Try to save yourselves. So 2 of the 3 guys were able to successfully bail out of the plane, and they're parachuted successfully. Leland Norton and his, I believe it was the Bombardier wasn't able to get out. Leland tried to keep the plane steady, and they ended up crashing into the ground, and he was killed in the explosion.
Damn.
So, yeah, eventually... he was buried in France in a military graveyard. Years later, his parents went back to France, recovered the body, and brought it back. And he's buried in Mountain View Cemetery in San Bernardino there.
No way.
And then, as a tribute, they ended up, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. And then they ended up naming the base for him. I can't find the actual citation, which is frustrating, but I had if I can find it here. The text on his citation was for self-sacrificing regard for the safety of his crew and fellow man and bringing great distinction on himself and the Army Air Forces. So there would have been a narrative with that. But again, that self-sacrificing nature and that different kind of courage. If you're in a foxhole, you can put your head in the ground, you can bury your head, or you can make that decision. Him, he's already wounded. All he can do is think, I want to get out of here, but if there's a chance these guys can survive, I'm going to try to keep this plane steady. And there was at least one witness that said that they saw him before it hit the ground bail out and get his chute open, but the bombs exploding killed him, which shows that he was conscious and he was aware, he was able to bail and he wanted to bail. He just didn't because he had to ride that plane as a glider almost at this point to keep it steady enough to try to get his buddies out. And by doing so, he was able to save 2 of those guys' lives.
Man, and then they go on to tell the story.
Yeah, and then they go on, and all those other planes are seeing this too. These aren't isolated. All these ships are seeing this, and he wouldn't have been the only plane going down either. There would have been other planes going down.
Now, would these pilots fly into targets?
What do you mean?
Like if they're going to die?
No,
there wasn't a lot of that.
There wasn't a lot of that. It would be, these aren't really manageable planes to do that with.
Yeah, not maneuverable.
Yeah, not really maneuverable. And it's not that kind of thing. It's not like a kamikaze plane. And, maybe in the Pacific, if you're going to hit the ship, you'll hit the ship. But here, he crashed into the open hillside in France, basically.
Yeah.
They had already hit their mission. Or the marshalling yard, or they hadn't hit it yet because he still had the bombs on the plane. But they're going, so it would be open fields and things like that.
And it just explodes, and
it
his guys
exploded
land
on contact, and then in his case, he was killed by the exploding bomb.
Yeah, and it's bombardier too.
Yeah, I believe it's the bombardier. Two of the crew members were able to escape, and then one died with him.
Imagine the story of those survivors.
Mm-hmm.
Like they actually went through a plane crash.
Well, it's not like they went home.
Yeah,
they got put on another crew, and they went back.
Sent right back
They
up?
were sent right back. Yeah, so
dude.
But there's a lot of these guys, man, that are multiple plane crashes and things like that. They have what's called the Caterpillar Club. You'll see it on some of the uniforms. That's a little caterpillar. It means your life was saved by a parachute, by the silk, because caterpillars make silk.
No
So there's
way.
the Caterpillar Club of all these guys, and they have little certificates that
Where they bailed?
where they had to bail. And then there's the I don't remember what it's called, the Winged Foot Club, and then the Goldfish Club. The Goldfish Clubs are guys that ditched in the water and on
I love all this little
life
stuff,
raft
dude.
and stuff like that. Yeah, they're out at sea, you know.
That is so cool.
Yeah, I told you about George Bush Sr.
No.
He was a pilot in World War II. He was a fighter pilot.
Didn't know that.
Yeah,
I mean, I knew he was in the military, but
he was shot down in the Pacific, and he bobbed in the water and was picked up by a submarine. His the other guys in his squadron or crew, made it to an island, and they were killed and eaten by the Japanese that were on the island. Yeah, and he was rescued, and he ended up being the president. You know, but little twist of fate, he could have been killed and eaten.
He could have been a meal.
Yeah, he could have been a meal.
Oh my
But there's I mean, the stuff that these guys went through that was almost not commonplace, but was a regular occurrence is
dude
insane compared to.
It would be imagine the stories they have. Like one of those little things would have been the highlight of somebody's life.
Right. The Miracle on the Hudson with Sully Sullenberg. That's one of the most awesome stories I've ever heard. But if that was World War II and that was a bomber plane, they would have been
laugh
like,
at him.
"Good job, guys.
Exactly.
Get back on the next plane."
Right?
You know what I mean?
It probably happened like that all the time.
Yeah, probably to a degree. It's some of these guys, you know. And there's helicopter pilots in Vietnam. Michael Novosel a Medal of Honor recipient helicopter pilot. He was shot down, I think, 3 times, and his son was in his unit, and they had the distinction of his son was shot down, and he picked up his son and rescued him, and then later in the same week, he was shot down, and his son picked him up and rescued him. Can you imagine?
Crazy.
You know what I mean?
It's just, gosh.
Yeah.
That is crazy, man. What a cool story, though, man.
Yeah, so that's Leland Norton, and again, he's not a Medal of Honor recipient, he's a Distinguished Flying Cross recipient, but he's a San Bernardino native.
So then that's when the base came here?
Yeah, so they ended up naming the base for him either right after the war or during the war, and then it just, you know, it's one of those things you drive by it all the time. Norton Air Force Base. What does that mean? I didn't know it for a long time. One day I drove by and I was like, wonder who that's named after, and I looked it up.
Yeah.
So yeah, if anybody's from San Bernardino, just out of curiosity, if you guys want to comment or anything, how many of you guys have heard of Norton Air Force Base?
Yeah.
Had any clue who or what it was?
I didn't know it was
after?
a person. I've said it 1,000 times.
Yeah.
Norton. It's over by Norton.
You either don't think it's a person or you think maybe it was like a businessman or somebody, because it's San Bernardino International Airport, but I'll never call it that. I'll always call it Norton Air Force Base to me.
Exactly.
You know?
I think my grandpa was in the Air Force there. I think that's how they ended up here.
So that's how a lot of people came to this area, to the San Bernardino. So San Bernardino, obviously, we have our local population that's always been here, but a lot of the people that came from the Midwest and everything like that settled here were from Norton Air Force.
And it was crazy. When it shut down, man,
you still, when you drive by the area, you'll see the remnants. And they just
the barracks that were there forever?
They just tore the barrack. Well, they tore the barracks down probably 10 years ago now.
They were just over there vacant, like these little houses.
Which was bad.
And they just left them.
Those big warehouses, they just tore those down the last couple of years. They had a big combat camera insignia I wanted real bad over there, but it was off limits, you know.
Was it?
On the side of you can't just go take things from a guy, you know, you can't.
If you know a guy.
But I didn't know a guy. And then I went to work one day and it was demolished. I'm like, God, I hope they took that sign off there, man, because you know how guys are with.
You gotta start letting me know about the things that you
This was a while ago, man. This is a while ago. But yeah, it's like I said, it's just one of those things. Again, we talk about history that's lost and history that's forgotten. I Googled his house again on 21st Street.
Yeah.
I looked at it. It's still there.
Boom.
And I thought, again, what if I went and told him? And then I was like, you know what? This is probably the same property, but a new lot. And I looked it up on Zillow. It's built in 1923. So that's the house he was raised in.
There.
Yeah, he lived in. He went to elementary school. I wrote down the names of his schools here. Let me check. He went to Elliott Elementary School, Arrowview Junior High, San Bernardino High School, another San Bernardino High School guy.
Yeah.
And then he dropped out of San Bernardino Valley College to go to join the Canadian Army. He ran away to Canada from San Bernardino. So, yeah.
Damn, what a badass. San Bernardino High School produces some studs so
Apparently,
far.
man, we got a few there. It is the Cardinals, I asked. So it's,
is it?
Yeah, it's my mother-in-law went there.
Oh,
my
very
father-in-law
cool.
went to Pacific. So.
All right, man. So what a great story. You guys have any suggestions for us? Please comment below.
Yeah, if you like what we're doing, let us know. So or if you have any ideas, if you want anything you want to talk about. I got a couple more San Bernardino stories. Or actually, I got a few Riverside stories that are good that I want to bring up. It's still the Inland Empire. It's still our home. Got a couple San Bernardino, and then
Then we'll go chase.
Sky's the limits. I got a lot of favorites. Yeah, we'll see. I got a lot of other passions and favorites that we can talk about. Yeah. So if there's anything you want to hear or want to know, let us know.
Let us know in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe, and we'll be back next week. Thanks, everybody, for watching.
Guys.